What can we learn from the life of Glen Campbell, particularly his later years when he, his family, and his band were struggling from the consequences of his Alzheimer's disease that robbed him of his memory, changing his personality? And what are the 10 warning signs per the Alzheimer's Associations of Alzheimer's? And how can we witness them in Glen Campbell's story? And how did his personality transition from the early stages of Alzheimer's and then to the middle and advanced stages? Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. Feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. Glen Campbell began his country music career as a studio musician, and in this position he was employed by record companies and recording studios to provide high-quality tracks for records released by many bands. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin also began his career as a studio musician. Glen Campbell released 64 albums over 5 decades, including many gold and platinum albums, selling over 45 million albums worldwide, earning multiple Grammy Awards. The widow of Glen Campbell wrote a touching memoir about the struggles of Glen Campbell and his family with the challenges posed by his cognitive decline caused by Alzheimer's. Why was she so public about his challenges? Those who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's are often capable of normal life activities. And indeed, continuing with social activities is helpful for the patients, although it does pose challenges. In 2010, Glen Campbell recorded his farewell album, Ghost of the Canvas, where several of the songs were inspired by these challenges. Should Glen and his band tour the country giving concerts? What if Glen Campbell's condition led to embarrassing incidents on stage? His response was simply, let the fans know I'm in the early stages of Alzheimer's. His children followed him into his musical career, and at the end they were the core of his band with the other musicians that had toured with Glen for years and had the patience to deal with his baffling behavior both in rehearsals and on stage. As with many performers with Alzheimer's, once they're on stage, the rush gives them much needed lucidity, and since Alzheimer's affects primarily short-term memory, they can perform songs learned long ago until the very last stages of the disease. Now, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Alzheimer's disease accounts for about 60 to 80% of the dementia cases. Other cases of dementia are caused by stroke or high blood pressure or other neurological conditions. Quite often, dementia can be diagnosed with brain scans and other medical tests, in addition to the standard cognitive tests. The story of Kim and Glen Campbell is helpful because, though the early years of their marriage were rough, they eventually overcame their problems. And they had many years of a happy marriage before Alzheimer's started to slowly change his personality. Kim met Glen Campbell in 1981 when she was 23 and he was 45. And although she was his 4th wife, they were married for over 3 decades. He was married to his 2nd wife for about 15 years and was married to his 1st and 3rd wives for about 5 years. Can these memoirs be attacked by the standard of TMI or too much information? His children by his other wives certainly thought that she revealed too many intimate details. After all, what child wants to read about such details about their father? And she discussed their intimate life and how her insistence on delaying intimacy until he was serious about the relationship did strengthen their eventual marriage. Church was an important part of both her life and also the life of Glen's family. Some members of the Campbell family actually moved into their mansion to encourage Glen to live a sober and Christian life. Now, in conclusion, in my humble opinion, these details are useful if you want to track how their relationship changed as his dementia became apparent and worsened. Popular musicians who tour to promote their albums often have troubled marriages. Once they have children, the wife stays home to raise them while the husband tours, and that can be a lonely life. The band often drugs and drinks between performances, not to mention the constant temptation by groupies who collect around the band. And these problems are somewhat lessened when both husband and wife perform together. Now, after Kim and Glen dated for some months, Glen disappeared and restarted his relationship with the famed country singer Tanya Tucker. They broke up again after a year, and she often partied with Glen and didn't temper his drinking or drugging while on tour. When he and Kim started dating again, Glen promised that he was over Tanya Tucker, that she wasn't good for him. And Kim and Glen had 3 kids together, and Glen had addiction issues when their kids were younger, partially out of loneliness while touring, trying out in rehab clinics several times. Now, after a drug-filled bender with Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac, she threatened to leave him if he didn't kick the drug habit, so drinking was a major issue after that. Often people wonder if alcohol or drug abuse would somehow trigger or cause dementia. Perhaps that is true. Dementia usually manifests itself in your 70s or afterwards, although for some people it manifests itself much earlier. For example, Rita Hayworth likely came down with dementia in her 50s. Quite likely, although we don't know for sure, these aren't triggers, though they likely hasten the manifestation of Alzheimer's, or maybe not, as Glen Campbell was in his 70s when he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Kim Campbell remembers that her husband Glen was often a little crazy when he was high on cocaine. And the antiquated King James translation has Matthew exhorting us to pray in a closet so you can pray in secret. And Glen would insist that they pray in a closet, rattling off Bible verses judgmentally. But Kim remembers. Fear at night led to frustration in the morning. That's because Glen never remembered what he had put me through. He'd wake me up with a good morning kiss and return to being the loving man with whom I'd fallen in love. He was a completely different person. And her description of this episode is similar to what she struggled with when he developed dementia many years later. Except that the switch from the insane to the apparently normal is sometimes instantaneous with dementia. And this demonstrates that the demented coping mechanisms are similar to those acted out before dementia, except they were often more unhinged. All of Kim's and Glen's children became talented musicians themselves, and after the schooling was completed, the whole family managed and participated in his career many tours. This seemed to be an ultimate solution to solve the loneliness that was at the root of his drinking and drugging addictions. And the family spent many happy years together touring before Alzheimer's struck Glen Campbell. But when he started developing Alzheimer's, Kim's relationship with Glen Campbell changes. The Alzheimer's Association has 10 early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's, and step 1 is memory loss that disrupts family life. And one of the most common signs of Alzheimer's disease, especially early on, is forgetting recently learned information, important dates or events, and asking the same questions over and over, and needing to rely on memory aids or family members for things they used to handle on their own. Now, what's a typical age-related change that's not related to dementia? We shouldn't worry if we sometimes forget names and appointments and remember them later. Now, Glen Campbell had always preferred to be the alpha male protecting and providing for his family, but he started becoming more dependent on his wife, sometimes calling her mommy, which really bothered her. Kim remembered. Glen repeated himself as he never had before. He started forgetting lyrics to songs he'd sung thousands of times. I laughed off these lapses as senior moments, as they had a 21-year age difference. And about this time, his children became part of his band, which helped. Now, like many celebrities, Glen had other people handling his business and finances, so he perhaps had less problems with sign 2, challenges in planning or solving problems. And quoting from the Alzheimer's website, some people living with dementia may experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. They may have trouble with recipes or keeping track of monthly bills. Glen started developing odd habits. When they had guests, Glen would insist that they park in certain places that only made sense to him. And he started counting his wife's shoes, pants, shirts, and dresses. And he started following his wife around the house. Once she walked around the pool a dozen times, seeing if he would follow her, and he did. And Glen Campbell started showing sign 3, difficulty completing familiar tasks. And the Alzheimer's website says people with Alzheimer's often find it hard to complete daily tasks. Sometimes they have trouble driving to a familiar place, organizing a grocery list, or remembering the rules of a favorite game. And when it came time for Glen to renew his license, Kim had to drive him to take the test since he could not find the DMV office. And although he flunked the written test, he passed an oral test, but she still insisted that he no longer drive. What's poignant is the story about his farewell album and the tour. And Glen knew that his cognition was failing him. He was now 74. When he was sharing his struggles, his anecdotes, his jokes and wisdom with his bandmate Julian Raymond, these emotions found their way into several songs on his farewell album. This stanza was in the song, A Better Place. Some days I'm so confused, Lord, my past gets in my way. I need the ones that I love, Lord, more and more each day. One thing I know, this world has been good to me. Better place awaits, you'll see. And indeed, sign 4 on the Alzheimer's website, confusion with time or place. People living with Alzheimer's can lose track of dates, seasons, and the passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something if it is not happening immediately, and sometimes they forget where they are, how they got there. And this is what Glen Campbell wrote in the liner notes for the album. All my little roller coaster rides, laughter, tears, successes, and failures, these are all part of who I am now, and the now Glen has all the ghosts of the old Glens hanging around. Now, at this time, the doctor offered a clear diagnosis of Alzheimer's, and Kim asked the doctor if Glen could continue his 5-week tour to promote the new album. And the doctor answered, I'd encourage him to tour. That stimulation may well help him function longer. Yes, encourage him to play. and encourage him to remain engaged with family and friends. Social isolation expedites cognitive decline. And Kim remembered. All his strange behaviors suddenly made sense. The little things that had been annoying me now evoked compassion. No wonder he followed me everywhere. No wonder he was jealous of anything that competed for my attention. I was his anchor. He needed me to feel secure. Now that need was greater than ever. Which leads to sign 5, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. For some people, having vision problems is a sign of Alzheimer's, which may lead to difficulty with balance or trouble reading. They may have problems judging distance and determining color or contrast, causing issues with driving. Which is why California requires that doctors inform the DMV of an Alzheimer's diagnosis, which is why Glen's driving license was revoked. Now, it's a typical age-related change, and that's vision changes related to cataracts. And that reminds me of a business associate. His mother had moved to Miami when she was elderly. She had few friends and visitors, and all she did was watch television. He noticed her mind was slipping, and the doctor said the cause was cataracts. She was nearly blind. Without the visual stimulation, her mind was starting to shut down, but after a successful cataract surgery, her mind recovered, although she was still as ornery as ever. Glen was aware that he had Alzheimer's, but he said that he didn't feel it, though his behavior was becoming more erratic. He had more problems with the lyrics to the newer songs, and he practiced them over and over again. They set up a teleprompter, both for practice and the tour. And Glen was insistent that they tour for the album. And Kim asked, "I love your attitude, honey, but there are things to consider. If you repeat yourself on stage or act a little strange, people might start talking. What might the press say?" Glen insisted, "Tell them the gosh darn truth. Tell them I've got Alzheimer's." They also decided to tell the world the story. They produced a rockumentary of his final tour, named Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me, which was a success. His admission had invoked compassion and encouragement from his fans. But rehearsing was a nightmare. Kim remembers each time a song was kicked off, Glen held up his hand. Wrong tempo, start again. Still not right, start again. Then the tempo was okay, but the speaker, the sound, the key was off. Glen was annoyed the band was not congealing, although he was the only one who thought so. But Glen's mind was all that mattered. He was the star, and that star had to be placated, although the star was not well. But when Glen stepped in front of the audience, and after days of anguish and sometimes repellent behavior, he became Glen Campbell. The star was reborn. He turned back into a seasoned artist who knew the difference between rehearsing and performing a show. It was the audience that made the difference. So what are some other signs signifying Alzheimer's? Sign 6, new problems with words and speaking or writing. People living with Alzheimer's may have trouble following or joining a conversation. They may stop in the middle of the conversation, have no idea how to continue, or they may repeat themselves. They may struggle with vocabulary, have trouble naming a familiar object using the wrong name, like calling a watch a hand clock. We also have sign 7 on the Alzheimer's website, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. A person living with Alzheimer's disease may put things in unusual places. They may lose things and be unable to go back over the steps to find them. And they may accuse others of stealing, especially as the disease progresses. Now, early on, Glen suspected that a thief was stealing his socks. And during the tour, Glen's behavior deteriorated. During one show, Glen was distracted by the air conditioning, stopped singing, and asked for a jacket. During another show, he simply stopped singing and asked out loud where he was and what he was doing. Now, the audiences were invariably beautiful. They simply applauded wildly until he started singing again. Now we'll talk about the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. In his last concert, Glen started yelling at the band, but then apologized to the band and the audience and laughed at the absurdity of it all. Everyone on stage smiled, and the audience stood on their feet and cheered him. Glen had slipped into the late stages of Alzheimer's, and his touring days were over. And we have sign 8, decreased poor judgment. Individuals may experience changes in judgment or decision-making, particularly when dealing with money, or they may pay less attention to grooming or keeping themselves clean. Now, early on, Glen had insisted on taking showers with Kim, which was later a blessing, as it solved a problem others with Alzheimer's patients have, as they typically hate taking showers. Another sign of Alzheimer's is sign 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. A person living with Alzheimer's disease may experience changes in the ability to hold or follow a conversation. As a result, he or she may withdraw from hobbies, social activities, or other engagements. They may have trouble keeping up with a favorite team or activity. And this was a sign that never really manifested itself in Kim's memoir. Glen always felt loved. Glen was always encouraged to perform to his abilities. And music has a healing quality for those with Alzheimer's. In the end, though, there came a time when performing publicly was just no longer possible. And in later stages of Alzheimer's, Glen Campbell couldn't watch television because he couldn't follow the plot or the sports match. Playing golf with his friends became a challenge. He was paranoid about his friends stealing his clubs. On occasion, he would momentarily forget who Kim was. Which brings us to the last sign of Alzheimer's, which is changes in mood and personality. And the Alzheimer's website notes that individuals living with Alzheimer's may experience mood and personality changes. They can become confused, suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious. They may be easily upset at home with friends or when out of their comfort zone. And what's a typical age-related change? The Campbell family had moved to Nashville since their children were pursuing their musical careers there. Kim remembers a problematic Christmas party with family and friends. When the guests arrived, Glen was inhospitable. He wandered off and wouldn't speak to anyone. Then his daughter Ashley brought out her banjo, and once again the magic of music did the trick. Glen picked up his guitar and played flawlessly. Within seconds he went from sullen to serene. He sang and laughed and socialized as if he were the healthiest man alive, which is our Christmas miracle. Soon afterwards, Kim decided that Glen could no longer go out in public. Taking care of him had become burdensome, so they placed him in an Alzheimer's facility, but after he struck out at the staff in demented anger, they had to take him back home. Quite often, Alzheimer's patients will strike out in anger and frustration. Finally, they checked him into a new memory care home, and the children joined the staff so Glen would feel more at home. By the time he was placed in hospice care, his memory was nearly completely gone. Now, in conclusion, Glen Campbell's daughter, Ashley, testified before Congress to lobby for increased funding for Alzheimer's research. And Ashley Campbell told Congress, Alzheimer's is a disease that robs people of their lives while they're still living them, and it robs family of the people they love while they're still standing in front of their eyes. I think a person's life is full of memories, which is exactly what this disease takes from you. And she continues, now when I play banjo with my dad, it's getting harder for him to follow along. I mean, it's getting harder for him to recall my name. Someday my dad may look at me and I will mean absolutely nothing to him. So get checked. Early detection matters. Medicine has advanced such that brain scans and other procedures can diagnose Alzheimer's in addition to the standard cognition tests. Also, medication has been recently developed with minimal side effects that can sometimes halt the progression of the disease. Now, my interest in Alzheimer's patients began when I volunteered to serve as the treasurer for my Over 55 Condominium Association. I intervened to halt the foreclosure of a destitute owner suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease so he could be assigned a guardian by the court, so he would not be quickly and cruelly thrown out in the street, but be placed into an acceptable and humane lockdown facility for Alzheimer's patients before his condominium was put up for sale. For this intervention, a large majority of our board and our officers censured me and asked me to resign from my position. We also discussed how Alzheimer's patients can be difficult to deal with, how the disease not only steals their short-term memory and cognition, but also steals the patients of their moral compass, how their life is often ruled solely by their emotions, how they are incapable of taking care of themselves. We discussed how many Alzheimer's patients are angry and sometimes strike out physically. This happened during Glen Campbell's late stages of Alzheimer's. Now to discuss the sources we used for this video. Kim Campbell's account of her marriage to Glen Campbell is by far the most informative profile of an Alzheimer's patient as his disease progresses. And AARP also has a review of this book by Kim Campbell. And Kim Campbell also has a blog. And there is a biography of Rita Hayworth, who is one of the first celebrities who publicly admitted they were suffering from Alzheimer's. And her caretakers helped to raise funds for the then new Alzheimer's Association. And the AARP also has articles on how Rita Hayworth and Tony Bennett suffered from Alzheimer's, among other profiles. In the future, we will review Travelers to Unimaginable Lands, which are stories of Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers, which the author has counseled or met in support groups. And if you're a caregiver, it's important that you join a support group. And these stories illustrate that Alzheimer's is not a disease that you catch. It is a disease that progressively grows worse. And if the caretaker is part of a dysfunctional family, these dysfunctions will only worsen, causing increasing resentment even by caregivers that genuinely try to be forgiving of their loved one's demented behavior. We will also review Oliver Sacks' famous book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, which includes both case studies of patients with dementia and other cognitive dysfunctions. And the 2023 Dementia Overview reviews many of the types of dementia. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.